Welcome to another student edition of Great Books, featuring a panel of local students sharing their interest in classic literature. Here's your moderator, Jack Hatfield.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us for the Great Book Show Student Edition. I'm Jack Hatfield. Our panel meets regularly to discuss important works of classic and modern literature. Today we're discussing Letters from Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King. In the midst of the civil rights movement, the campaign against racism and segregation moved in April of 1963 to Birmingham, Alabama. They had nonviolent marches and sit-ins. Martin Luther King was roughly arrested during this campaign and put in jail. At the same time, a newspaper published a letter from 8 white Alabama clergymen that came out against King and his methods, criticizing him for being an outsider causing trouble. They also disapproved of his pushing the issue because it would eventually be solved by the courts if given enough time. During his prison stay, King wrote a letter in response which defends the strategy, arguing that people have a moral responsibility to break unjust laws and that the time for action was now. Well, the white clergyman had several problems with King and his method. One of them was he came down and broke laws. Martin Luther King made a distinction between just and unjust laws. How did he think that one could make that distinction? What is an unjust law?
Well, an unjust law is a law that is meant to keep someone down, to degrade them, whereas a just law is meant to help them, to bring them up.
Okay.
And he basically said that it's your duty to disobey unjust laws because you should not be forced to degrade yourself, and it's both your privilege and duty to resist.
In the letter, he makes it really clear that an unjust law makes it so that it's legal for someone to be of a higher level than someone else, for someone to look down upon someone else and oppress them in some way. And he is really an advocate for standing up against these laws throughout his entire life and throughout this letter, and it's a very important thing to him and his work.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it was really important to the letter to realize what his definition of unjust and just was, because he is not someone who just wants to create chaos. It's not his aim to rebel against these laws just for the sake of rebelling or to be controversial. He has a concrete reason and he has a message to these discrepancies against these laws.
It's not like he's doing them because, oh, I just feel like breaking a law. He's doing it because he believes it's what's right to break an unjust law, like you said, because it's making someone higher than another.
Yeah, and I think two more reasons. One is he felt that laws should be equally applicable to everybody, and it wasn't being applied to the white segregationists, but it was applied to the black demonstrators. Yeah. And he also made the point that these laws were not, that the blacks did not have a voice in the vote. So they weren't part of the process of making the laws, which goes against our Constitution.
It's like the taxation without representation concept.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
He makes a big point at some point talking about how the white segregationists are looking down upon him because they're like, oh, you're stirring up chaos, you're coming out from the outside and being rebellious. And he makes a good point that that's exactly what the people who started our country were doing. You know, that's Thomas Jefferson and the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. That's exactly what they were doing. And that's also a problem throughout our country. Even now, sometimes we're like, oh, you're bringing up something that we don't need to talk about. But the point of our country is to make sure that everyone has a fair and equal chance.
Yeah, yeah. He calls it tension. He said, tension is good. It's not bad.
Yeah.
It's that you move ahead by tension. So
I really like that because he's basically saying, he's not saying we need to cause problems or scare people, but I think I liked that he said creative tension, that we're using our minds to bring issues to the surface and force people to confront them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what was brilliant, is that he's forcing people to confront the problems rather than just and lashing out at them himself.
Right.
Yeah, I completely agree with you because he brings up the point that sometimes what is legally and socially the norm or the standard isn't always correct. Like, he brings up the point that in Hitler's Germany, it was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew. So that obviously was a completely terrible circumstance that had happened, and back then it would have been considered unacceptable. So maybe consider your actions more and consider your judgments more now, because what will it look like when we take a more in-depth look in retrospect?
So what does he suggest one does with unjust laws?
Stand up against them. I mean, throughout the entire letter, he's saying, I have the right to stand up against these because these are degrading people. These are not right. And he knows that he needs to say something about it.
How does he suggest one should stand up to those laws?
I think he's saying to first question all laws and to consider whether they actually are just or unjust. And once you've made a decision on what you feel on this law, then you should protest not violently but with words and have a conversation about it rather than just attacking your opponent.
Yeah, Martin Luther King was not someone that was strongly toward violence. If you notice, he just did marches and he was very peaceful of what he was going for.
Why peaceful? And what he's saying, this is a nonviolent way to get at what he wants. Why?
Because...
Sorry, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Because by being violent, he, in a way, turns on and destroys the principle of what he's fighting for, claiming that all people should be safe and have the same opportunities, and no one should be brutalized by the police or feel unequal or unsafe. Also, by being nonviolent, he puts himself above, in a sense, people saying, you're just as bad as us. So it's a way of acting the better man, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. I feel like it distinguishes him from the people that he's working against, because when both sides become violent, and it's hard, the lines between good and evil become like incredibly blurred, and it's hard to see who's working for the better cause.
I completely agree, because he's too high to stand up for segregation with violence, because he knows it won't solve anything, so he goes about it with words and with silent protests.
I'm going to read something that he says in this letter. He said, one who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the consciousness of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for law. How would you put that in your own words?
I think he's saying that it's like Henry David Thoreau, with his I'm not leaving this jail. It's that a man who is resisting tyranny, or like Thomas Jefferson said, resistance to tyranny is obedience to God, that you are, in fact, obeying nature and God and doing the right thing when the law becomes unjust.
He makes a big point about you need to stand up and say something about it and be respectful, though, and you need to make sure you're doing it in the right way. And even if someone comes against you and arrests you, you need to stay strong through the entire thing and not go up and be like, oh, never mind, I changed my mind, I don't want to do this anymore. You have to stay through your cause the entire time, and in doing that, you are respecting other people to the utmost degree, because you are putting your life before other people's. You are making sure that things are fair and equal for everyone.
I agree with you, and I also think that it's sort of a testament to him saying that when you are arrested, you have to be calm and you can't react poorly, because then if you act poorly, the community around you will immediately react calling you traitor or someone who would deliberately disrespect these laws. However, if you react civilly and if you react with respect, then it will cause them to associate you with more positive connotation, and they will start to question perhaps their own beliefs, because they will think, well, if he can be so respectful and be such a good man in this situation, then maybe it is not his morals that are wrong, maybe it is mine. It goes along with the same theme of love over violence, because if you are yelling at someone, if you're being violent towards someone, they're less likely to listen to you. Whereas if you're open to a conversation with them and talking calmly with them rather than talking angrily at them, they won't shut down, they won't close you out, they will probably be more welcoming to your opinions and welcoming to having an actual conversation about your issues.
There was also a marketing ploy that played out very well, that the rest of the nation saw TV coverage where these troopers were beating on these blacks and kids and women and old people, and that really turned the country against that. Would have been different if you had a bunch of black people and a bunch of white people fighting each other. So
it's because it forces people to look at their own hypocrisy rather than pointing their finger at your hypocrisy, which I think is why he was successful, because he forced the nation, and he made himself above reproach in a sense.
Reacting with violence allows them to be like, oh, well, you did that wrong, so now I have a reason to hold my view against you. You did this thing. You were bad in this situation, so now I have the right to be like, well, he was bad in this situation, so I don't like him anymore.
That's right, yeah.
Exactly. Like the best argument is a counter-argument, and his counter-argument is his amazing act of never being violent against someone else. So people can't accuse him of that. People can't accuse him of being a bad person, because in reality he's never harmed anyone else.
Another complaint that the white clergyman had was that he didn't live there. They said, you know, you're coming down here causing trouble. You don't live in Alabama. You don't live in Birmingham. And then Martin Luther King had, I think, a great answer. He says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. We're tied up in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. How does that play out? I mean, what would be an example of it affects everybody indirectly?
Well, it affects everybody indirectly because if it's just happening in one place, then you have to, even if it's happening everywhere, but it's really happening, you know, majorly in one place, you have to go to that place specifically, because then you can shut everything down and it could cause a domino effect.
I don't know if you guys are aware of the Ferguson riots a couple months ago. Yeah, like they started at the main root of the cause, but they spread to major cities all over the world, or all over the country. It's a similar effect. If they see people taking action against these injustices in one city where it's the main root of the cause, more of the main root of the problem, more people will be inspired and more people will realize the own injustices that are happening in their own community.
Yeah. I feel like even if there's something happening somewhere else, it gives someone else the right to say, oh, well, it's okay over there, so why isn't it okay over here? Because there are people who support different points of view everywhere. No matter where you live, there's going to be someone who's like, well, I don't like that person because they're this. And if that's a problem somewhere else, that it's okay to not like this person because they're whatever, and people will have a way to reason with themselves and be like, well, it's okay that I don't like them because other people don't like them. People have a really group mentality because psychologically we want to be like other people. We want to have people to surround us, and so knowing there are other people who support the same views as you makes it so that you are reassuring yourself that you're in the right.
Also, I think that, I mean, I'm not always super optimistic about humanity, but if you see someone being treated horribly in one place, I think that it would encourage you to stand against it. And if you see someone taking action and against that injustice, it gives you a leader to look at that person is taking action, so it can start you thinking about the same thing. So it kind of gives us something to hope for, since one person's doing it.
One thing that Martin Luther King said that I thought was very interesting, he said, I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klan, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order. And he says later, lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection.
It's frustrating knowing that you believe in something, there's someone who agrees with you, but they don't want to say anything about it because they're too worried about what other people will think of them or making sure that all their life is in order. It's angering because you're like, well, you understand what I'm saying, but you don't feel the same way I do about it. How is that possible? You know, it's something where if everyone who is in between just changed their mind to the side they were closer to and was like, well, I'm going to support this now and fight for the same thing, things would get done much faster. But it doesn't, because there are plenty of people who don't want to pick a side because they don't want to hurt other people's feelings. They don't want to have their neighbors think something about them. You know, it's all about people in their own minds.
It's much more comfortable just to sit back and observe and not get involved.
The thing that history again and again, like at the start of World War II or in the abolitionist movement, if people don't stand up, then injustice will take root and it will spread and fester until it is far greater than anyone expected. So I think it makes me very upset when people will say it's better to have order than to fight for what is right. I mean, it's not the meek who will inherit the earth, it's the people who will stand up for what they believe it is right and will do what they have to do and rise to the occasion.
Yep.
A lot of people search for just acceptance, not really what's right, and that causes a lot of problems because a lot of people don't want to say what they're feeling because they're afraid, oh, maybe someone might make fun of me. So a lot of people have these great opinions that could help change a lot, but they refuse to share them.
I agree with everything that has been said. I just really, it goes along with that quote that evil men only succeed when good men stand by, or something along those lines. Most people aren't evil. Most people don't wish harm upon other people. That's human nature. However, people have the herd mentality. They want to be similar to other people. So I feel that if one person doesn't stand up, then no one's going to stand up for what they believe in. So when Martin Luther King did start to stand up and create this movement, more people began to think, maybe this is acceptable, maybe my opinion isn't so radical or unheard of, and that is what caused him such success.
This goes to his other, a quote that you must be an extremist, something to the effect about what side will you take or something, that I think if everyone was a radical in a sense, this world might be a better place if the radicals
would agree with each other in some
No,
ways.
not necessarily not agree,
argue
but
between each other and decide.
They would put the humanity ahead of their own anger, or which doesn't always happen. So I think that the world would be a better place if people always stood up and attacked the problem instead of saying it's none of my business or it's better just stay here.
I feel like radical isn't quite the right word there. I understand what you're saying, but I feel like radical applies more to terrorist groups like ISIS. Extremists. So maybe more of just an opinionated view, or like the
people who have an opinion who are willing to take a side and argue about it and discuss it.
The motivation to peacefully discuss your opinions.
Yeah.
He had, Martin Luther King had a very interesting point that addresses this. He talks about self-purification and making sure that your motives were pure. And I think that would be something absolutely necessary to temper this radicalism, to make sure that they were going on the right side. What role did he think churches should play? He says that churches should be thermostats, not thermometers. In other words, they shouldn't just reflect the society like a thermometer just tells you what temperature it is. It should be a thermostat which sets the temperature, which would set the society.
He wants the church to have their point of view and help people move in the right direction with God. He wants people to do the right thing in the name of the Lord and he feels that the churches should take a stand and say, we feel that this is right and we want everyone in our church to help with this cause.
I feel like especially at this time, it was very common and it was very standard for people to attend church regularly on a weekly basis. So one of their major influences on how they made their opinions on the community that they were surrounded by was from their church, was from their pastors and their preachers and any other religious figure. So when the churches would remain complacent about this or not voice an opinion for they were scared of being ridiculed or thought negatively of, it would be another instance where good men stand by and don't voice their opinions, and it creates more evil in the world. So I believe he was calling them to action and telling them, the Bible says that you should love your neighbor. This is not loving your neighbor. This is hatred and this is evil, and you need to stand up against this because that is not what you claim to believe in.
But this is one of the places where I actually differ with Martin Luther King about the church. I understand what he's saying. I don't think the church is a necessary thing for this to happen. While it might have been popular at the time, I think that if everyone used their own moral compass, they wouldn't require the guidance of a spiritual leader saying, read the Bible, this is what it says to do, now do it.
The thing is, not everyone does that. At the time, everyone went to church. It's a thing that the entire community went to church, and it's something that it's so important to the community. They need to take a stand on it, and even if they take a negative stand on it, at least they took a stand, you know? As he said before, being a moderate is the worst thing you can be. You need to take a stand about it.
And I believe he wasn't saying that it was required for him to be successful. I believe Martin Luther King was a religious person. I believe it was important to him that this happened, and not necessarily that he needed it to happen for him to be successful or needed it to happen for people to open their eyes and change their opinions, but more of he would like it to happen, and he didn't agree with the way that they were taking an opinion and stance on this topic.
Doesn't he also say in the text that he believes segregation is a sin? So it's something that he thinks that the church should be saying, hey, this is something that we don't think should be going on and that we need to change. So I think, and he also wanted to make sure the process happened wider, because a lot of people, like you said, in the community, a lot of people were very religious and always went to church. So it would help get a lot more people onto the movement.
Yeah.
And I think to address what Quentin said is that the church is a social institution, and it's the way some people get information. They go and they hear a pastor just like they read newspapers. And so what he is saying is that you can't separate the secular from the religious, and that the churches should be addressing some of these social problems, which sounds reasonable to me.
I wasn't saying that that desegregation is inseparable from the church. I think that the quest for freedom, in a sense, should be universal. I mean, loving other people and peace aren't those the values of Hinduism or Judaism or Islam? So I don't think necessarily he was right in saying that the churches needed to champion this cause in a way.
No, I disagree. It's just another way to me, it's just another way people get information. It doesn't have to be the only one, and it isn't the only one. And why not have them be one conduit to loving your fellow man?
Yeah, I agree. I think it was more of a channel, it was more of a medium to reach the people than rather perhaps the only way to reach them, you know? It was the same as the way we reach people through social media and the way we reach people through television shows and
exactly.
and the internet now. It's just a different social standpoint that he had to use in order.
We're coming to almost the close. Are there topics that really grabbed you here that we haven't discussed?
The one thing that he said that really grabbed me was he said, he thought it was almost an honor to be considered an extremist, which I was sort of poking fun at them calling it an extremist, but he claimed that Jesus was an extremist in love, and we know that he was a religious person, and that really stuck out to me because Jesus was an extremist in love, and he went to list other historical figures and saying that they weren't extremists, and I think it just goes to show that anyone who has made a change in this world at one point has been considered crazy or has been considered or it has been considered impossible what they were trying to achieve. And at this point, he was considered that person. And look at the world that we live in now. He has made an incredible change, and I think it really tells us that the next time you come across someone who maybe has a totally radical opinion or something that's very different from what you believe in, maybe consider it more before you dismiss them.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you, because he does say that being an extremist, if someone says the definition is standing up for what you believe in, like very strongly, then he is okay with being called an extremist, because it is true that he is standing up for what he believes in, that he is strongly fighting for his cause.
So kind of a last word, did you find this meaningful? Did it?
Yeah.
Very.
Yes, I thought that was really interesting because I really haven't looked that much into Martin Luther King. Like, I know the basics that I teach you in school and whatever. I found this really interesting and I really enjoyed reading it.
I found it very impactful and very insightful as to what the social situation was back in this time period, because I was not alive during that time, and it was good to see a primary source about this.
It really gave a lot of insight during what was going on during the Civil Rights Movement.
What about lessons you could apply now? Are there any?
The same thing of, you know, any sort of social movement that's going on today, and realizing that the same thing happens today with all kinds of different causes, gay rights, gender equality, all kinds of things. And it's the fact of, it's the same process, you know? And I just find that really interesting. It's the same process with the same views of people, and you just have to do the same thing, and eventually it will work out.
I would agree that it's very applicable now that whenever there's a struggle, someone needs to stand up, and that could be you, I think, that you could say, no, this is not going further, I need to stop this, or that you care about something deeply enough to make a statement. So I think this is a very meaningful in today as it was then.
I feel like it's saying, like, when you look back in 20 years, what side of the line do you want to be on? Will you be proud of the stance that you took? And will you be okay with what your actions were 20 years ago?
Yeah. And I'd bring up that tempering all that with self-reflection to make sure, because I have seen people that demonstrate for the right cause, but for the wrong reasons, just because they're angry, or just because they're, you know, for whatever reason. So, well, I thank you all.
Thank you.
Interesting discussions. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. Join us next time when we discuss another great selection. As Aristotle said, the best way to learn is to get together in small groups and discuss great ideas.